My name is David Babington. I'm the Managing Director of the Pet Professionals and also a vet. Welcome to the webinar, Understanding Canine Nutrition. I'd like to introduce our speaker for the evening, Claire Harvey. Claire qualified as a veterinary surgeon from the Royal Veterinary College, University of London in 1984. Claire is especially interested in medicine, nutrition, client care and treating pets as part of the family. Claire has worked as a vet both in the UK and France and currently practices as a part-time vet and lectures internationally on topics related to small animal nutrition. Due to the large numbers of people attending this webinar, we'll save questions until the end. If you would like to ask Claire a question, please type your query into the chat box on your control panel and click send. I'll hand over to Claire. Thank you very much.
Good evening everybody, and welcome, and thank you to David for that lovely introduction. And I'm going to just get started really with the first slide. Obviously everybody in the audience this evening has got a slightly different understanding of nutrition. Some of you will have done a lot of nutritional studying. Other people will have memories of school biology and food technology and domestic science, or will be used to reading quite a bit about nutrition in the press and hearing about it on the TV and the radio. So I'm going to try and take a sort of middle of the road approach. This may be too simple for some people and too complicated for others, but I'm just trying to make sure that there's a little bit of useful information this evening for everybody. So, why is nutrition important? Well, pets are lifelong companions and part of the family, so pet owners generally want to do what is best for their pet, and it's well understood that feeding an animal or a person optimally, in other words, that the best possible diet will help to support long-term health and can help to offset the likelihood of illnesses. And when it can be clinical nutrition, or what we call prescription diet foods, can be used to actually help to reduce the signs of illness and help animals to recover from illnesses and injuries. As David's told you, I'm a veterinary surgeon with a specific interest in nutrition and internal medicine, but I'm not a board certified nutritionist, so I'm not qualified to advise the clients that I see on making up a home prepared food for their pets in their own kitchen. And if you are a pet owner who would be particularly keen to do that, or perhaps there's a good reason for needing to do that, then your own veterinary surgeon would be able to engage the services of a board certified nutritionist to help with that objective. But I'm not going to be discussing homemade foods this evening. Now, the pet food market is a really competitive area, and there's a vast array of foods, of treats and of supplements that are available, and these products can be purchased at the supermarket, in the pet shops, at your veterinary clinic, or online via the internet. And with this enormous choice, it can be very difficult to make a wise decision when selecting food for our pets. And to add to the sort of the difficulty, there are quite a lot of fads and fallacies regarding feeding our own foods for ourselves and also for our pets that can make it very difficult staying up to date, working out what is myth and what is science. Many of us feed our pets, feed bits of our own food to pets without really knowing whether it's safe to do that. And when we're assessing pet foods that are available for purchase, trying to actually work out what is economic and what is good value, what is a good quality food, and what isn't, can be a bit of a minefield. The idea this evening is that I help you to try and make wise decisions when you're making these choices. I'm just hoping the next slide is going to load for us. Yeah, there we go. So some of you may not be aware that this list of foods are foods that we quite often indulge in, but can be harmful to our pets. And apologies for the cat photograph. Most of the images that I've incorporated into this presentation are of dogs, but I couldn't resist this one. And you'll probably be aware that chocolate can cause terrible tummy problems in our pets and can actually cause convulsions. One of my own dogs managed to break into a box of chocolates that was supposed to be out of reach and ended up convulsing for 45 minutes, and we nearly lost her. So I've had first-hand experience of that as a pet owner, and it's something that I go out of my way to avoid. Onions and garlic can cause clotting problems and anemia. Raisins and grapes can cause kidney failure, and chewing gum that contains xylitol can cause a sudden drop in blood glucose and liver problems. And in fact, I was involved in a case of that earlier on this week. One of the big problems that we see, though, are dogs that enjoy little bits of the gravy licking out the tray after meat has been roasted on a Sunday, and foods like sausages that have got a very high fat content, and this can cause not just vomiting and diarrhea and indigestion, but it can cause a very severe inflammation of a very delicate organ that sits near the stomach within the abdomen called the pancreas, and it's exceedingly painful, and some dogs can literally have life-threatening signs and be very, very ill. So we do need to be careful of fatty foods in dogs. And then raw egg, which certainly my grandmother used to think was a great thing to be giving to her breeding Springer Spaniels, actually contains a substance called avidin that can interfere with vitamin B levels and can cause quite nasty problems. So that these are all foods that we consume on a regular basis, many of us, but are not suitable foods really to be giving to pets. And I'm sure within the audience this evening there will be people that have given dogs grapes and raisins and they've been fine. But it's not a chance that I'd want to take with my own dog, and I think it's wise to be aware of this and to minimise the risk if you possibly can. So what are the types of pet food that are available generally for purchase or for preparation ourselves? Well, obviously, traditionally, cats and dogs historically have eaten a natural diet, and I think that my cat, who's an avid hunter, even though she has a commercially complete food available to her 3 times a day, is a cat that manages to keep our little small holding rodent free. And last night and again this morning she came home with a mouse, and that is something that I personally feel is entirely natural for a cat to be doing. I know there are other people that might find that very upsetting, but I wouldn't personally expect my cat to survive off her the prey that she's managed to catch. I do still feed her a commercially complete food, and as a 14-15-year-old cat, she's still in top form. Now, would prefer to use a homemade food, and I've already mentioned that that's not something that I'm qualified to discuss this evening, that there are a wide range of commercial foods that are available through all the different sources that I've already listed, and I just wanted to sort of revise that really. So some of these foods are available as dry foods, others as canned foods or trays or semi-moist, and that when we're looking at these and trying to work out whether or not it's a food that we would like to choose for our own dog, we need to look at the packaging to see whether it's a complete food, which means that it can be fed on its own and is complete and balanced without having to add anything to it, or whether it's what we call a complementary food, which means that when fed on its own, some of the key essential parts of the diet are missing, and that food would need to be fed in conjunction with another food which should be named on the label in order for the diet to be complete and balanced. You'll also find that there are ranges of food that are aimed at different life stages, what we call wellness foods, and then via your own veterinary surgeons or following your own veterinary surgeon's advice, there are clinical diets or therapeutic diets, what we sometimes call prescription diet foods, that can be used in pets that have been diagnosed with conditions that would benefit from a change in diet. So let's have a little look at some of the foods that are commercially available. And the first one I've got up here is a commercially available raw or natural diet. And some people prefer to go down this route. And if a client was to ask me, assuming that that's the route that they wish to follow themselves, what course of action they might like to consider, I would refer them to the Pet Food Manufacturers Association website, and you will find there that there are some raw foods that are commercially available and endorsed by that association, and that means that the foods are complete and balanced and meet the nutritional requirements stipulated by the relevant authorities, the NRC and AFCO, which we'll have a little look at during the course of the evening. Other people really are much more focused on the price of a food and whether it represents good value or not. Now, the price of the food could look high or low, but the way that we actually need to evaluate the price is thinking about the cost per day for the individual animal. In other words, what your feeding cost would be. And we can compare the quality of foods by looking at the cost per kilo or per pound weight if you're working in old money, as it were. And generally speaking, a food that is low price per kilo will include poorer quality ingredients, especially protein, and may contain excess amounts of mineral, what we call ash, on the label. And as a result of that, it's a little bit like feeding the family on chicken wings rather than buying turkey breast. And if you buy chicken wings, that the price per kilo will be lower, but there'll be more skin and feathers and gristle and bone and fat, and therefore as part of what you're buying can't be used as sort of highly nutritious food. Some of it obviously is going to be trimmings that will end up in the bin, and some of it we might eat, but we might not actually be able to derive much goodness from it. So often using a food that's a higher price per kilo is a reflection of a better quality food, but because you're feeding a better quality food, then you may find that the cost per day is still bearable, especially if you were to use a dry food rather than a wet food, so you're not actually paying for tins of water, and you're also feeding smaller amounts because more of the food will be nutritious and there'll be sort of less poo coming out the other end. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration when we're considering price. Now, certainly if I was to ask my granddaughter what food that she'd like to give our little dog Phoebe, she would be very taken in by television advertising and by the names and the pictures on the products. And many people, believe it or not, make up their mind about what their marketing preferences are when they're very young, literally by the age of 7. And it's no mistake that so much money is spent on marketing products, but what I'm hoping today is that you'll be less interested in the name and the pictures and more interested in the actual nutritional value of the foods. On the right you can see that the presence of an ingredient is something that can be very appealing, and it is true to say that pets can become a little bit hooked on certain flavours, especially flavours that are derived from meat or fish sources, which can be very appealing to them. And there's no harm doing that if we're feeding a good quality food that's nourishing and meets all their nutritional requirements. but the idea of different flavours is a two-edged sword, because animals can become then a bit fussy, which can be one problem, and a second problem is that we can almost train them to get bored with their food and then start to demand different ingredients and different flavours. So we need to bear again all of these factors in mind when we're selecting a food. One of the big areas in the pet food industry has been the concept of sort of marketing based on fear and the absence of an ingredient. And you can see here in the product on the left that's grain-free that this is something that some pet owners are now concerned about. And what I would say is that that many of us and our pets are able to digest grain and derive nourishment from grain with no untoward effects. There are a very tiny proportion of the population, and my brother happens to be one of these. He's celiac and he's not able to eat wheat or rye or barley, and there are some Irish red setters, for example, that are a little bit like that and are wheat intolerant. But generally speaking, grain can be a very good source of nutrition, and it's easy to avoid grain if you have a personal preference, or if you're unlucky enough to have a pet that isn't able to digest it normally. But otherwise, I think that we need to be careful about avoiding ingredients that may be nourishing based on almost an irrational fear. So just to try and be clear about what we do want to feed and what we need to avoid. And if you've got a dog that occasionally has a little nibble of toast or biscuit and is absolutely fine, then it's highly unlikely that it needs to eat a grain-free food. But if you choose to avoid grain, there are some very good product ranges that are grain-free, and that's absolutely fine as well. Now, in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of breed-specific foods, and this is partly clever marketing, because it's obviously very appealing if you own a Westie to see a picture of a Westie on the packaging, but it can also be important and to nutritional health. So for example, the size of the biscuit, if you are a Great Dane and you're offered a biscuit that would better suit a Chihuahua, that there's a risk that you could accidentally choke on it and that you're not going to be chewing it because it's so small. And if you are a Chihuahua and you're fed a biscuit that's really aimed at a giant breed dog, then you may have difficulty chewing into it. So the size of the biscuit can be important, and we also know that there are certain breeds of dogs that are more predisposed to certain conditions, and therefore a slight tweaking of what is otherwise a very healthy food in order to offset the risk of certain conditions in certain breeds can be really very beneficial. But again, I think that we want to make sure that it is a true nutritional benefit and not just a marketing gimmick. Now, when I first qualified back in the early 80s, life stage foods, in other words, foods that were aimed at puppies, adults versus mature adult dogs, pregnant dogs and lactating dogs, weren't available. It was a sort of dog food, general dog food that was available, canned and dry. They were complementary, and we sort of fed a canned dog food and some mixer. And since then there's been an explosion of life stage feeding that enables us to feed the food that is most appropriate for the age of the animal, knowing that the growing animal has different nutritional requirements to the adult animal, and that the mature adult or senior animal has got other health risks that can be offset by slightly modifying the basic adult food. But even at that time in the 80s, it was very clear that cats should be fed cat food and dogs should be fed dog food. So if you have got a cat that occasionally strays towards the dog bowl, I think it is better to try and discourage that And if you do happen to have a small breed dog that's a little bit fussy, don't be tempted to start offering that little dog cat food, because that really wouldn't be ideal either. Nature's very kind and forgiving. You can get away with it in the short term, but from the point of view of long-term feeding, which is what I'm focusing on this evening, that wouldn't be what we call optimal. It wouldn't be the best feeding strategy for your pet. Now, we've already had a little look at breed size when we saw that product that was aimed at Westies, so I'm not going to go through that with you again. We'll just move on to the next slide. Now, when pet owners talk to me in the consulting room about the fact that their dog loves to have this little bit of sausage and that little bit of bacon and this little bit of cheese and this little bit of toast, and that they much prefer that to a complete and balanced food, one of the things that I try and tactfully remind them of is the fact that a dog's taste buds are very different to ours, and my little dog will with tremendous enthusiasm, where I live in the Forest of Dean, eat little bits of sheep droppings and deer droppings and fox poo and everything else if she can get hold of it. And you know, I have to conclude that a dog which is healthy will have a very good appetite, regards it as its role to keep the territory clean and tidy, and generally that involves eating things that they don't think should be hanging around, and that really the stinkier the better. And if they've made a mistake and they've eaten something that their stomach doesn't cope with very well, they are well designed to vomit that back up again, and many dogs will unfortunately scavenge and eat rubbish, what we call garbage gastritis, in other words an upset stomach due to eating rubbish, and seem to be able to cope with that quite well. Not something we want to encourage, can be very messy to deal with, and some poor dogs with delicate tummies, obviously it can make them very ill. But I think it's worth remembering when we're thinking about the flavour of a food or the taste of a food that really dogs aren't that fussy. Some of the stuff that they will eat it looks absolutely disgusting, but they seem to really enjoy it. So now we're going to move on to really the nuts and bolts of nutrition, because I'm going to ask you to really switch off your emotional thinking and start to look at science and logic of nutrition. We know that the taste of a food is important, that it's influenced by the flavour, the smell, the texture, the shape, the size and some of the ingredients, and that it's necessary that the food should be palatable enough for the dog to eat enough of the food in order to be healthy and of a correct body weight and body condition. But you could offer very palatable foods that aren't necessarily nutritious, and none of us would allow our children to eat chocolate cake all day simply because it tasted lovely. We would want them to eat their meat and two veg, or their tuna fish salad, or their omelette or and beans, or whatever it is. And likewise, we need to be logical and scientific about the feeding of our pets. And by constantly bombarding pets with very tasty tidbits and treats, it can interfere with the intake of their proper food and can also encourage a fussy appetite. And if you are only a little dog like this little Yorkie and you have 6 or 7 crisps or a couple of digestive biscuits, that's going to be your tummy filled, and you probably aren't going to want to eat your good quality dog food. So we need to also think about the scale of what is provided. A little dog like this really only needs a very small amount of food because it is such a small dog, so it's got to be good quality. So when we think about food, we would often think in our own kitchen about the ingredients that we use to make up a meal, and those ingredients provide nutrients, and nutrients are food substances that will help to provide nutrition so that animals and people can be healthy and of a correct body weight and body condition. And what nutrients are needed by the dog are stipulated by the National Research Council and AFCO, the two organisations that are mentioned here. And using that data, pet food companies are able to formulate foods that are convenient, so you're not having to sit and puzzle over it yourself or seek the advice of a specialist. The foods are complete and balanced for long-term feeding, and they are specific to the species and the life stage, and also the lifestyle, in some cases the breed, and in some cases honing in on specific health benefits. For example, keeping dogs slim, helping them to keep their teeth clean. So we're going to now step into the world of food science and nutrition. And by having a better understanding of basic nutrition, you will be able to better assess the foods that are available for you to feed to your dogs, and hopefully it will help you to formulate a good feeding plan so that your dogs are as healthy as possible, what we call optimal nutrition. So as I said a minute ago, a nutrient is defined as a food component that is required for bodily function and helps to support life. And nowadays, with the advent of complete and balanced foods, the deficiency disorders that I learnt about at vet school when a lot of people were still feeding table scraps and homemade foods to their pets, those deficiency diseases are really rare. And what we tend to see more of when we talk about nutritional diseases or nutritional disorders, they're normally linked to dietary excess, in other words, too much food. And just as we're constantly being told by the medics that there are too many members of the human population that are overweight, that sometimes our pets, and up to 50% of cats and dogs in the UK sadly fall into this category, too many pets are actually getting good food but actually getting too much of it. So in many cases the bad nutrition emanates not from picking a bad food, but just not feeding it properly. And the other way animals can fall prey to dietary excess is if they're eating a balanced food and then their owners select food supplements that are in addition to the complete and balanced diet, and then they can actually find themselves in a situation where they've got too much of certain nutrients that can be harmful. And we'll look at a couple of examples of these as we go along. So what are the nutrients of concern? And some of you may have to sort of scratch your brains a little bit to go back to your biology classes at school, and others will be real food enthusiasts and this will all be very easy for you. But just a quick revision of nutrition, and this is applicable whether you're a person or a dog. So the classes of nutrients that we're concerned about are water, protein, fat, carbohydrate, minerals and vitamins. And these different nutrients go in and out of vogue, so you're probably aware that fat has been the big baddie for a few decades, and at the moment carbohydrate is the new sort of bad food that that within human dietary fields is being focused on. But what I'm going to be talking about is balanced diets and complete foods that are commercially available and complete, and tell you a little bit about what each of those nutrients does for us, because I would like to say that a complete and balanced diet is the important thing, and that really nutrients aren't good or bad. It's a question of some of them being essential and what the mix is, you know, how much we put in of one versus another. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, water is the most important nutrient, and we should always make sure that our pets have constant access to clean, fresh water, because the body is made up of approximately 70% water, and even a small amount of water deprivation will lead to dehydration, so literally 7%, and that by the time a pet gets to 15% it will be dead. And this is particularly important in young animals, animals that are pregnant, animals that are producing milk for their young, what we call lactating dogs, and also animals that are exercising, working hard, are using a lot of water, animals that are out and about in hot weather, unable to get shade and unable to get water. That can happen in a traffic jam, actually, in the back of your car. I've seen dogs that have got caught in traffic jams on the M25 that have ended up really becoming very seriously ill through inability to access water in a hot car. And the other sort of group of dogs that will run into problems very quickly with water deprivation would be diabetic dogs, dogs with kidney problems, dogs that are on medicine to manage heart problems, and older animals where their sense of thirst isn't working as well as it did when they were younger. So water, we're just going to take it as read that all animals need fresh, clean water at all times. Now, the thing about water in the food is that it can sort of muddy the water, if you pardon the pun, when it comes to understanding the nutritional information that's on the label. Because the nutritional information that's on the label talks about the amount of the different nutrients that are present in the food as fed, and doesn't take into account the differences in the moisture content of the food. And this can make things look rather confusing. So if you've got a canned dog food with a protein content on the label of 12% and you're comparing it with the protein level of a dry dog food with a protein level of 12%, it looks as though they've both got the same protein content, but because the canned food is over 80% moisture and the dry food is only 10%, when you actually do a calculation to work out the protein content of the dry part of the food, you can see that the protein of the present in the canned food is actually 66.7%, which is a very high protein level and could be indicative of very poor protein quality, and that the protein content in this particular dry food you can see is actually slightly lower than average. So looking at the label can be confusing, and it may be that you would want to seek advice at the veterinary clinic if you were going to try and make assumptions about the protein content of a food and the suitability of that food for your pet, because protein is a really important nutrition, and just looking at the label doesn't enable us to really clearly understand the amount of protein that's in there, in other words the concentration of the protein, or the quality of the protein, which is just as important. So moving on from water and its importance, the next thing that we need to consider when we're choosing food for our dogs is the amount of energy that they need. And the theory is that animals eat to satisfy their energy requirements and then they stop eating. But do you remember I said that dogs are scavengers, they like clearing up, that a healthy dog will often have a voracious appetite and very happily munch through more than it needs to be healthy that day, just in case they don't get any food tomorrow. But getting the energy balance right for your dog will help it to be in good body condition and of a correct body weight, so that it can have a healthy and active and hopefully long life. So where do we get energy from? Well, the three energy sources in food come from fat, which provides a long-term energy source, protein, which can be used for energy, and certainly cats rely on protein for energy more than dogs or people would, but it can be used for energy. Traditionally, protein is used for replenishing essential body tissues and structures that are made from protein, but it can be used for energy as well. And then carbohydrate is a great source of short-term energy, so grains would fall into that category. Now, energy is measured in kilocalories, or you will see sometimes kilojoules being mentioned, and fat is much more energy dense than protein or carbohydrates. So although all three of those nutrients generate energy, fat is actually 2¼ times richer in energy than protein or carbohydrate, which means that if you have a jacket potato, you will be eating fewer calories than if you eat chips, and it's the fat really that makes the difference. Now, that doesn't mean that fat is bad, because there are animals, for example puppies and pregnant and lactating bitches, dogs that are working really hard, dogs that are perhaps not very food orientated, that need a higher calorie food. So by using good quality fat at a higher concentration in their food, you can help them to maintain a healthy calorie intake in a form that's very tasty and is also very energy rich. Now, the energy that is present in the food isn't all available to the pet, and if we think about where some of the energy goes to, that some of it is lost in the feces, and if you're feeding a poor quality food that's not very easily digested, then or if it's a food that doesn't suit your dog's digestive system, then you will see much more in the way of poo coming out the other end. Perhaps your dog will need to pass feces more frequently, and that means that some of the goodness in the food isn't being utilised by the body. Some energy is also lost via the urinary tract when the dog passes urine, and some is lost as body heat during digestion, and I think we can all relate to that sort of warm glow after we've had a big Sunday roast dinner, and that's our body working as a little bit of a furnace, metabolizing the food, and actually some of the energy in that food is radiating as heat from our body, and that can be used as a way of helping animals to stay slim, because if we feed them more frequently during the daytime, so in other words 3 meals a day rather than 1 meal a day, not only do they feel less hungry between meals and possibly less grumpy and tired, but they also will radiate more body heat while they're digesting the food, and it's much harder to be fat. Obviously that still hinges on feeding a suitable food in suitable amounts, but certainly feeding little and often is now believed to be a good thing to be doing for dogs, and the recommendation of my boss in France 30 years ago, which was to make sure that dogs had a day off food every week, were only fed once a day, would be very, very out of kilt with current thinking. Now the problem with energy is that yes, we need some, enough to be healthy and good body condition and body weight, and that when we are working hard, or we've got puppies growing in our tummies, or we're supporting a litter, or we're growing ourselves, then we need more energy. But obviously too much energy isn't a good thing, and when animals are able to eat more than they need, they get fat. I know that sounds very blunt, but a lot of people will say, oh well, he only eats the same as the other dog, or he's got big bones, or his dad was big too. But when we're looking at pets that come into veterinary clinics, we're not just looking at what the scales tell us, we're looking also at their body condition. And if we can see that they've lost their waist and that they've got rolls of fat over their hips and over the scruff of their neck, that we know that regardless of what they are eating or have eaten, that they have had too much energy over a long period of time in order to be like that, and that we want to work with you to try and help correct that. Conversely, if you had a puppy or a pregnant or lactating dam, or a pet that was recovering from illness, and it was being fed a low energy food that was full of fibre and very low energy content, that they wouldn't physically be able to eat enough to thrive. It's called bulk limitation, where there's so much bulk in the food that the amount that they can eat is limited, and therefore their ability to be well nourished is impaired. Conversely, offering very tasty, high energy foods will mean that pets lose the ability to self-regulate when it comes to food intake, and there will be this serious problem with obesity in both growing puppies and in adult dogs. But in larger breed puppies, being allowed to eat too much, even if they're on a really good food, won't actually help them to be bigger, stronger puppies. It will just simply put more strain on their joints and increase the risk of joint problems that often develop at that critical phase when they're sort of teenagers at about 5 to 8 months of age. So it's really important to keep puppies slim while they're growing. And in a nutshell, what I'm saying is that optimal nutrition, so the best feeding of your dog, is achieved when the dogs are offered the right amount of the right food. So, and both of those things are things that we need to be constantly thinking about. And I can't quite see what that says. I think it says something like, I learned to open the fridge today and I ate lots of things that were in there, but I couldn't get the Doritos because I couldn't open the bag. And this would be quite typical of a Labrador that perhaps doesn't get out and about enough and is a bit bored at home, and is a hungry dog and a healthy dog, and will dedicate lots of time and imagination to accessing food rightly or wrongly if there's nothing else happening. So I think the other thing about feeding is making sure that not only do we give the right food and the right amount of food, but the dogs get plenty of opportunity to burn up the calories and be fit and healthy and happy. And that leads us on to looking at the energy requirements of individuals. And these will vary throughout life. So obviously per kilogram of body weight, a puppy or a pregnant dog or a lactating dog or a working dog will need more food, more energy than an animal that is resting, neutered, and not producing, in other words, not growing or pregnant or lactating. And that superimposed upon the calculations that we can do to try and determine the energy requirement of a dog at different life stages or with different sort of work schedules, we also need to bear in mind that there is a tremendous individual variation, and it's always a source of frustration to me in the clinic that there are some nurses that seem to be like gazelles and they sort of nibble and run and nibble and run, and they're always eating and always darting around and they're always slim, and then other people like me that just think Mars bar and put on half a kilo. But we have to remember that that is just individual variation, and this bell-shaped curve on the right hand side just shows us that that the average dog is going to be in the middle of that curve, but if we look that 34% of dogs will require approximately 10 to 15% less, and 34% of dogs will need 10 to 15% more. And it's perfectly reasonable when interpreting the feeding guidelines on packaging to feed, give or take, 10 or 15%, but you don't want to be varying it more than that, because otherwise you could be underfeeding or overfeeding, and if you're running into problems, then obviously speak to a veterinary nurse at the clinic who'll be able to give you some wellness advice on feeding if your dog is struggling to be either slim or sorry, if it's losing weight or gaining weight in an unhealthy way. And as I mentioned just now, when pets are presented at the clinic, we don't just weigh them on the scales, but we now record body condition, and there are some scoring systems that go from 1 to 5, so 1 is thin and 5 is fat, and we want them to be 3, and there are other people that use a scoring system that's a little bit more detailed where it goes from 1 to 9. And what we're trying to do is make sure that everybody ideally is in the middle. So we're looking at weight, we're looking at body condition. Now, when we're thinking about nutrients, not only do we need to think about the nutrients that we've talked about in terms of producing energy, but we also need to think about the nutrients that can't be made by the body and must be present in the food, and we call these essential nutrients. There are other nutrients that from the building blocks in the diet the body can make them for themselves. They are all important, but some of them have to be preformed in the food, and others the pet can make for themselves. Bizarrely, carbohydrate is not an essential nutrient, which is why I was saying that if you choose not to feed grain to your dog, even though it can be a varied and economic source of energy and may suit many, very many animals, that it's not an essential nutrient, and therefore if you choose to avoid it, that's absolutely your prerogative. within the group of carbohydrates, and it's a very big group. Obviously we've got simple sugars, we've got complex carbohydrates like rice and potato, and there's also a group of carbohydrate sources that fall into the category of fibre. And fibre is a non-digestible carbohydrate from plants that can really have profound effects on the digestive tract and can be really beneficial in the management of some conditions, health conditions, which are what we call fibre responsive. So you'll be aware that a lot of the advertising off the back of Special K came from its controlled fat levels and its increased fibre levels, and there was no point imagining that we could manage cholesterols if our cholesterol well if we were eating chips and lots of trans fats every day. So it's a little bit about the fibre in our diet and a little bit about the fat, but there are lots of other conditions that will be helped through fibre modification in the food. And certainly if you've got a dog like this boxer up here that seems to have a little bit of a problem with flatulence, that if you're feeding a very high fibre food or a food that has got a lot of protein in it that's very hard to digest, or is getting excess minerals in the food, that these are sorts of things that can contribute to flatulence, or in the case of the dog below, diarrhea. And sort of jiggling around with things like the fat levels, the protein sources and the fibre levels can help to ensure that the digestive system is able to work normally, and that would be a measure of nutritional health. If a dog is got a lot of tummy gurgling, a lot of belching, a lot of flatulence, vomiting and or diarrhea, these are signs that there's something not right and action needs to be taken. So as I said, fat is back in vogue as at the moment, and fat provides not just energy but also fat-soluble vitamins and essential fatty acids, and obviously it makes the food taste nice as well. But too much fat can be bad for the body. It can result in pets becoming overweight and indeed obese. It can trigger pancreatitis, which I've already mentioned to you, and also diarrhea. But too little fat in the food can result in poor growth, in unhealthy weight loss, poor ability to cope with pregnancy and lactation, and poor physical performance at work, and certainly certain skin and coat conditions. So essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins and good quality fat are really important. And when we have pet food, dog food at home, it's really important that that food is stored in a cool, dry area in order to make sure that those essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins aren't damaged by the oxidation of the air. And if we're opening a bag of food, we want to try and shut it after each meal, and we want to make sure that we only buy enough to last a maximum of 100 days, because you couldn't guarantee the food would still be fit for consumption and healthy if you were buying sort of like a 15-kilogram bag of food for a 1-kilogram Yorkie. That's probably not going to be very good food by the time you get to the bottom of it. Now, as I mentioned at the very beginning, protein is a nutrient which can be very appealing and very tasty to many of our canine friends, and protein's made up from little chains of amino acids, and depending on how those amino acids are linked together we'll get different structures, and that would include fur and feather and beaks and claws. I mentioned gristle or cartilage when I was talking about the chicken wings earlier on. Now all animals need all 23 amino acids in order to be able to have a complete and balanced diet, but many of those they're able to formulate themselves, and the dog actually only has 10 amino acids that are really essential, and if they're getting those they can make all the others themselves. And proteins are used for maintenance and repair and growth of essential bodily structures. The body is constantly in a state of flux, constantly being replenished, and therefore dietary protein must be coming in all the time. Animals and people can't store protein, and therefore the protein, if they eat too much of it, actually is converted to fat and just simply ends up causing extra work for the liver and kidneys, which is fine if you've got healthy liver and kidneys, but not so good if you're an older animal and got problems. And the typical example that I use to help pet owners understand this is somebody who's had a very athletic life, and then they slow down for whatever reason but still keep eating the same amount of meat, and that meat can just be converted to fat if they're not burning up the calories. So protein can be a sort of a bit of a two-edged sword. But having thought about how many calories a dog needs to be healthy, that when you offer a food that is complete and balanced, if you can give your dog the right amount of food, then the pet food manufacturers will be able to ensure that all the other important nutrients are present in that amount of food. In other words, all you have to do is choose the right food and feed the right amount. But if you were to feed a food that wasn't complete and balanced, or if you were to severely underfeed a food, then the diet would be imbalanced because key nutrients won't be present in adequate amounts. And without those essential nutrients coming in the right amounts, that the food is not a balanced diet and the animal could become unwell. Protein, I've already said, we talk about protein in terms of not just the amount that we feed, but the quality of the protein. And egg is used as our gold standard. You can see a list of very high quality protein containing foods, and we know there are some dogs that absolutely love the jelly in their commercial canned food, but actually that's derived from a part of the animal carcass that has no nutritional value, and they may guzzle their way through that jelly, but it's actually not doing anything other than just giving the liver and kidneys extra work and tickling their taste buds on the way through. So we need to be thinking about the quality of the protein as well. Now, just as we finish, I just want us to have a little look at non-energy producing nutrients. We've already talked about water, but there are also vitamins, minerals and trace elements. And the vitamins that we're particularly interested in are the fat-soluble ones, A, D, E and K. And if you were to give your dog a little bit of liver oil, cod liver oil every day, in addition to what it was already getting through its food, it can actually get a toxic accumulation of these vitamins in the liver. So really we only want to give the dog what it needs and nothing extra, whereas the water-soluble vitamins are not a problem. They're anything that's surplus to requirement just is lost via the kidneys in the urine, and the toxicity isn't a problem. The vitamin C that we need and guinea pigs and the red-breasted bulbul bird need is not something that dogs or cats need. So generally speaking, vitamin deficiency nowadays would be really rare if a dog is fed a good quality commercial food, and it's more likely if somebody's dog is actually being fed primarily a homemade food that hasn't been sort of carefully formulated, or if you've got a very fussy dog that's sort of picking and not eating properly. Now, vitamin toxicity is something that can occur, as I say, in the case of the dog with overdosing of something like cod liver oil over and above what nature requires. And in the case of the cat, the classic example is eating too much raw liver. Vitamin deficiency, in the case of the dog, the classic one was rickets, linked to problems with calcium metabolism, and something that my poor old dad suffered from when he was growing up in the war and didn't have access to milk. So that's something that thankfully we don't really see very much nowadays. Antioxidants are something that I wanted to mention just very quickly, and that's because this is a tremendous area of nutritional interest at the moment, both in people and in pets. And the idea behind nutritional antioxidants, which are substances that are used to combat free radical injury and slow down inflammatory disease processes and the aging process. And this is something that you're often going to see now on the labels of pet foods, where it says rich in antioxidants, and that's really what we're aiming at. And these aren't the antioxidants that are used to preserve the food, and they're not the vitamins that are there for nourishment. They're there purely to combat free radical injury and slow down the age-related process. I've just mentioned L-Carnitine here because it's a vitamin-like substance which some people give as a nutritional supplement, and it's used by bodybuilders, and it's actually a really useful nutrient that is present in some dog foods that helps to build muscle and good quality bone and reduces unhealthy fat accumulation. The last thing we need to look at is the minerals and trace elements group, and these are often referred to on the label as ash, and minerals often work in pairs, so we heard of sodium and chloride, calcium and phosphorus, and these minerals are only needed in tiny amounts but for very essential functions. And again, if you're feeding a complete and balanced food, you can take it as read that these are all present in the appropriate levels. And too much ash in a food can result in bladder stones, and there's a little bladder there with some stones in it. And too much salt it can result in dogs actually getting a bit hooked on salty foods, so that if they then later on develop heart problems or kidney problems or liver problems, it can be very difficult to wean them onto a lower salt food. In certain breeds we have to be careful about a liver problem which results in an unhealthy accumulation of copper, which can make the dogs very poorly, and in other breeds we see a breed requirement for extra amounts of certain minerals. So again, these are examples of breed-specific foods. And just finishing off, we know that cats are not small dogs and that they have very different requirements, and this is because cats are carnivores and dogs are omnivores, so a dog will very happily munch through things like bits of melon and stuff if it has the opportunity, and can actually be fed a vegetarian diet if you choose to do so, whereas a cat would become very ill very quickly. There are different life stage foods, as I mentioned at the beginning, and I'm sure you'll all be aware that nowadays if you've got a growing puppy, that it should be fed on puppy food, that it needs to be fed little and often, and that generally speaking we would want to continue with puppy food until the dog is approximately 12 months old, and that we would want to monitor the growth of the puppy to make sure that it's not too fat and not too thin. We wouldn't want to give mineral supplements over and above what is already in a complete and balanced food, and that if we happen to have a large breed puppy, that it would be preferable to feed a large breed puppy food. And that we know that the completion of the growth curve in the giant breed puppies tends to occur at a later date than in the smaller breed dogs, and therefore it may be that if you had a giant breed puppy you would continue feeding puppy food for a little bit longer than the 12 months. In pregnancy we want to change the dam onto a puppy formula when the pregnancy is diagnosed. We shouldn't be supplementing the food in pregnancy, and we want to feed little and often and monitoring her condition to make sure she's getting enough food and not getting plump. In the older animal, we know that pets are living much longer now, and generally speaking the hope would be that a senior dog would be moved on to a mature adult food at approximately 7 years of age, but if you've got a giant breed, unfortunately their happiness is concertinaed often into a shorter lifespan, so we'd want to change over at about 5 years of age. And there will be many features of these mature adult foods that are designed to offset the different diseases that occur at greater risk of occurrence in the older animal, and again we need to keep the pets at the correct weight. We've talked already about nutritional assessment, so I'm going to just whisk through this. And the last slide is just literally to show you that this dog, Savannah, who was a rescue dog and was on a very poor quality, low-fat food, simply after 6 months of being on a good quality wellness food, you can see that her coat is denser, it's silkier, and generally she just looks like an all-round healthier dog. And I'm sorry that we've gone over a few minutes. I was trying to give you as much information as possible in as short a time as possible, and I'll hand you back to David.
Thank you very much, Claire, for a very informative webinar. Not surprisingly, we've had quite a few questions coming in, so if I could ask you a few of those now just before we finish.
Yeah.
One question really concerns the way the dogs drink water when they're out and about on walks, and they'll drink from all sorts of muddy puddles. Someone's asked the question, can they drink seawater, and what happens if they drink too much?
Okay, that's a really good question. So what happens if dogs drink seawater? And the thing about seawater is obviously it contains quite a bit of salt. And just as seawater wouldn't suit us if we were shipwrecked somewhere and couldn't access water, that you could end up almost with like a salt toxicity situation, that we would expect the same sort of risk to be a concern in the dog. Now, often dogs will experiment and have a little lap, and some of them will be sick afterwards, and therefore it's not something we want to encourage. And if dogs have got access to clean fresh water at all times, that's something that a normal dog, a sensible dog, would drink out of preference to the seawater. Once they tasted it and realised that it was salty, the hope would be that they would drink the water that you provide for them. Furthermore, seawater isn't always clean, and there would be the risk of germs and parasites. So I think that by and large, just make sure you've always got a water bottle out and about with you, so that if your dog is thirsty, you can give it clean, fresh water.
That's great advice, Claire. We've had a lot of questions on the subject of treats for dogs. There's a vast array of treats for dogs available on the market, and you can obviously make your own. But what do you advise owners on this subject?
I think, as I sort of alluded to when I was talking about that little Yorkshire Terrier, that a lot of the problem with treating is the scale of the treating. And in nutritional terms, if a dog is eating a complete and balanced food and is healthy and of a correct body weight, we select treats that are not harmful, and they're being fed as less than 10% of the calorie intake, then the general consensus is that that's something that both the owner and the dog may enjoy. It's part of the owner relationship with the dog. I'm a big believer in learn to earn. In other words, my poor little Italian Greyhound dog has to work hard to get her treat, and that may be that I brush her teeth and then she gets a treat afterwards, or we do some agility, but I don't just hand them out at a certain time of day. And I'm also a bit choosy about what I give her, because I'm very keen on healthy diet, and with many dogs it's the pleasure of receiving a hand-fed treat that's important rather than the treat itself. That there are some treats, as I mentioned right at the beginning, things like grapes and chocolate and everything, that obviously we need to avoid. And I would also say that a little of what you fancy is fine, but everything in proportion, in scale really, and that there are a large number of treats available on the market, and I think we want to try and choose something that's good quality, that our pet enjoys, that agrees with our pet, and to make sure that it's sort of good portion control really. And if you're in any doubt at all about a particular product, then speak to your own vet or veterinary nurse.
That's great. And related to that question, Claire, what about puppies? I mean, puppies love to chew. What would you recommend particularly for puppies?
Okay, that's a really good question. Puppies and chewing. So puppies, like young children, explore with their mouths, and therefore we need to protect them from themselves, because puppies will chew through things like electric cables and bits of furniture. They'll swallow stones, and that therefore all of those non-food things need to be safeguarded from the rather over-exuberant puppy. We want to make sure that the puppy is fed little and often, and the general rule is that we feed every 2 hours in pre-weaning if we're having to do home rearing for any reason, that from 8 weeks of age 4 times a day, from 12 weeks of age 3 times a day, and between 6 months, from 6 months onwards, and I would advocate for the rest of the life of the dog, at least twice a day. And that if a puppy is being fed appropriately, then hopefully it's not going to be eating too many stupid things. But from the point of view of providing safe items for chewing and for rewarding, we need to remember that the developing jaw bones, muscles and teeth of the puppies cannot withstand forceful chewing, and that many of the dental aids and chews that are available are aimed at older dogs, and they are designated according to the breed size, and that's because we don't want to damage the developing jaw bones, muscles or teeth, and therefore I think it's got to be an appropriate chewing aid. Depending on what side of the world you ask vets, the advice you give regarding things like bones and chicken wings can be very different. And as vets, we spend a lot of time trying to help dogs with dental problems, and what we are told, and I'm not a specialist veterinary dentist, so this is me relaying information to you from specialist veterinary dentists, that their belief is that a dog of any age that chews on bones will probably, because of that bone-on-bone chewing force, will be at greater risk of tooth abscesses due to cracked teeth. And therefore I think we do need to be careful with puppies particularly, that we don't allow them to damage themselves through over-exuberant chewing, but we give them things that they can chew safely, and also that so that's from the point of view of finding an outlet for the chewing, but that through life we provide them with means of keeping their teeth clean and strong and healthy, and that also, if possible, not just using treats and chewing aids to occupy the puppies when they're chewing and to try and provide a dental cleaning benefit, but try, if at all possible, to get advice from the veterinary clinic on how to train your dog to allow you to brush the teeth, because brushing every day is going to be better than anything else, and that's something that takes time and patience.
Thanks, Claire. Some good advice there. Labradors are one of the UK's most popular breeds at the moment, but they've got a reputation for having a healthy appetite, to say the least. There's been some research that shows that this is a genetically controlled situation. Can you give us any more information on that topic?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. So Labradors would be generally speaking, and we can't make sweeping generalizations, but generally speaking they would tend to be sort of greedy dogs within the large breed dog world, and that within the medium breed dog world, beagles tend to sort of fulfill that sort of space, and certainly this side of the Atlantic, our Labrador gene pool tends to be a greedy dog that accumulates fat very easily, and over in the States that is less so. So when Labradors come in from the States, they tend to be bigger, more muscular, leaner and less food focused, and that wouldn't be typical of many pets in the States that are overweight, but I do think it reflects a different gene pool. And it means that if we choose to own a Labrador in this country and it has the hallmarks of being a very greedy dog, that we do have to protect it from itself. And last summer I had to open up 1 week the intestines of a 9-year-old Labrador bitch that was long past needing to chew because she was teething, and she had swallowed a raw potato whole, and it had got lodged in her intestines, and she was very, very ill. And then the following week her daughter did the same thing with a windfall apple, and neither of those sort of vegetative structures could be digested by the intestines and had to be removed surgically. So we generally, in the greedy Labrador, would be worried about them becoming overweight and having joint problems and putting a strain on their heart and their lungs, etc. And therefore we want, usually when they're adult and assuming they're not pregnant or lactating, to feed a more filling, higher fibre, lower fat, lower calorie food in order to help to manage that abnormally increased appetite. But there are medical conditions that can further worsen that situation. So if a dog is, for example, suffering from early diabetes or an underactive thyroid, or a hormone condition that affects their blood cortisol levels, all of these things can aggravate the risk of increased appetite and fat accumulation even more.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you, Claire, for delivering an excellent webinar, for making what can be seen as a complicated subject a lot more straightforward. If anybody would like more information about better caring for their dog, then do visit the Pet Professionals online community. So that's www.thepetprofessionals.co.uk. There's lots of great information there from vets and veterinary nurses on how to better care for your pet. And I conclude by thanking you very much, Claire. And good night, everybody.
My pleasure.